Hey everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well and has had a good week. So, today we're doing things a little bit different. I'm shooting this in the morning because by the time you see this, I'm gonna be on the way out. I'm heading out of town for a couple of days. So, typically, what I like to do here, and just for a little bit of insight, I try to give you guys the most up to date model data that I can as quickly and as efficiently as I can. So with this one, we're going to have to, of course, do things a little bit different. And as a result, there may be some things on here that are prone to changing, especially in the medium range. And there's a couple of changes that could be possible even with today's setup on here. Because you see, we do have a couple of slight risk areas that have popped up for severe weather potential. Today's main threat is, for the most part, wind and hail. There is a very marginal 2% threat that pops up towards the central and northern plains here, but I don't expect a whole lot to come out of that. We'll get into the details of that momentarily. And then as we go further along, we're taking a look at our day 2 hazards. It's pretty much the same old song and dance. A marginal risk with a threat of damaging winds and hail. I think the day 3 threat, which would be Sunday, there might be a small tornado risk up towards the northern states as well, but we'll wait and see how that pans out. I should be back by this point, so if things become more notable, maybe a live stream will happen. Probably not going to be back in time for a forecast video. We've got a lot of driving ahead of me. So, in any case, though, we're going to keep the ball rolling here. And while we're at it, of course, we're going to also be talking about the tropics here. And while I'm not expecting any sort of development, the thing that we're going to be paying attention to most, and I'm going to actually extend the screen so you can see it, that little 10% area that we've been watching over the last couple of days is going to be making its final approach over towards the Texas coast. And again, as I mentioned before, while I wouldn't be too concerned about any sort of major tropical system or even minute tropical system at this point, this is, of course, going to bring more rainfall to areas that most definitely do not need it. So flooding concerns are on the rise for these areas as we go further along here. No flood advisories or flood watches in effect yet, but we do want to be on guard because while this isn't a tropical system, this will have downpours that will be very similar to them. So do need to be on watch for that. So going forward here, and we're going to shift our attention to today and really this afternoon's threat for severe weather. This is what we're looking at right now. So as we go later into the afternoon, you can see a little bit of action begin to fire up over here. And there may be a chance that this area over here where we saw that 2% tornado threat gets a chance for an upgrade here. Because you see almost a vortex-like signature. This could be an MCV popping up here. And with this could enhance that severe weather threat if these storms can really take advantage of the environment and develop here. There is expected to be some degree of low-level spin, hence why we have that 2% threat to begin with over towards this region. As that's going on, we do have a northern mode, and this is the other slight risk up towards the northern states that pops up later in the afternoon and into the evening. And early on, that's when we start to see peak storm potential. From that point, it looks like we get some pretty significant weakening by the time we get towards midnight. So I wouldn't expect a long duration event with this. Now, if we rewind this back and actually take a look over towards the northeast, right around Philly and areas up towards the New England region is where we can expect more chances for stronger to maybe even severe storms. Coverage is not going to be very widespread. There's going to be a couple of pockets where we have some stronger storms possible based off what we're seeing on model data. Of course, there are some changes that are possible with this, but for the most part, I'm pretty confident in things staying, for the most part, tame. I wouldn't go as far as to say they could be completely tame. I wouldn't be surprised to see a few watches and warnings, especially given the amount of energy that we have in the atmosphere right now towards these areas, especially as we get later into the day. Of course, we'll be starting with the northeast here, but Cape seems to be kind of in the wrong place. It seems like the areas further to the south would be a little bit more favorable given the energy available. what really piques my interest, and I wish that I could be on standby to go live for this, would be this area right over here towards east central Kansas. Maybe, and I mean just maybe, given the right parameters, which we have that low level spin from the feature here, along with the energy that we have available, if we get some decent lift from this source as well that pops up, we could have, like I said, we could have a couple of tornadoes from this even. I really would expect more so damaging winds more so than anything else. It even had the shape of a linear structure with it as well, so I'm kind of placing my bet on that, if anything, if we're going to get any action there. Then over towards North Dakota, it looks like we have a lot of energy available. So these storms, I would expect them to hold up pretty well into the overnight, even if they end up dropping below severe limits. Still going to be troublesome, bringing plenty of thunder, lightning, and of course heavy rain into the equation, maybe even some small hail. So now that we've talked about that, of course, we need to get into the brass tacks here. And the brass tacks, unfortunately, in this situation has a lot to do with the heat. And I'm kind of concerned with this, part of this being because, well, I work outdoors and it's not going to be all that comfortable outside. So, what we're going to do here, we're going to knock out two birds with one stone. We're going to look at the 700 millibar here in the bottom left corner of your screen. And I'm actually going to shrink that window back while we're at it, so that way you can get a cleaner view across the board. But with that 700 map, we're going to be looking for short waves and potential thunderstorm activity with that. And mainly with the 500, we're going to be paying a lot more attention towards the ridges and the troughs that we're going to see. For the most part, it's really not much in the way of troughing. It's going to be a lot of ridging early on. And it's the ridge that's going to be our big problem maker in regards to our heat. And look at where exactly this high pressure would end up setting up. It's going to end up right over the Mississippi River Basin, where we often will have some of the most ridiculous humidity and dew point values here as well. So, like I said, I'm very concerned for the southeast, southern plains, and while the central plains is going to be pretty hot too, whenever you have those higher humidities along with those hot temperatures getting into 90 plus degrees, especially getting into triple digits, it just makes it absolutely miserable outside. I can tell you that firsthand from experience from spending 10 plus hours a day outside. It's not something that you want to deal with. Not at all. And I mean, it's still pretty well reflected even on the 700 millibar map as well, especially as you look towards the early part of the run here. If you look towards the bottom left corner of the screen, you can see that ridge setting up as we get towards the very end of the month. The good news about this is that this setup doesn't look like it's going to last for an extended period of time. As we get into the start of August, we start to see some movement, and then we mercifully start to see some troughing beginning to occur here. And while that's a good thing for the eastern states, over towards the western states where we've had a little bit of troughing here and slightly cooler temperatures, a shift is going to occur where we start to see the ridging beginning to come into play over here. And this will be raising your temperatures, unfortunately. This is just how it goes sometimes. Whatever we have going on one side of the country either moves over to the other in one way or another. Typically, we see it from west to east, but since this is clockwise flow, we sometimes see the opposite occur, and this is a classic case of that. As far as storm potential is concerned, it's pretty much the same old song and dance, at least early on with the model run. As we get towards the end of the month, I mean, there's still going to be a little bit of potential towards the central states, but it does look like storm activity does slow down in the short term before that troughing begins to occur towards the eastern half of the country as we get into that first week of August. And that's where things become a little bit more interesting with the weather there. Still a lot of unknowns left to be hashed out there in regards to our setup for shower storms and severe weather, etc. But I would say that favorability for the stronger storms will most likely be over towards the Ohio Valley at this point. Wouldn't rule out the southeast at this point either, but at this point they're more or less hunches right now. So let's go ahead and get into the ugly part. And this is going to hurt to look at for a lot of us. So we're doing something a little bit different, and we're looking at the relative humidities on the bottom left corner of the screen in conjunction with our temperatures. And that's important because that is going to help determine our heat index here. And like I said, this is the ugly part. I normally don't like delivering bad news, and I definitely don't in this case. But I mean, you kind of see it pretty clearly here. There are widespread triple-digit temperatures as we get towards the very end of this month. Whether you're in the southern plains, the deep south, the east coast, 80s, 90s, triple digits are going to be plentiful, and they even still will linger over towards the southern plains as we get into those first couple weeks of August here. And if you couple that along with the relative humidities that we have seen, that's where my concern really lies. Like I said, whenever you're dealing with the oppressive humidities like what we're seeing here, where you're getting into 70, 80, even 90+%, where you tend to lose water at a much faster rate. Now, I'm not laughing at dry heat. Dry heat is pretty brutal in its own right, but there's something about being out in that oppressive humidity. You just feel heavier, almost feel like you're swimming, but you don't get that cooling sensation from the pool water in this case. It's not fun. I will tell you firsthand, it is absolutely miserable. So if you're anywhere, whether you're in the central, southern plains, Midwest, into the southeast, if you don't have to be outside, I would try to avoid it. And if you do have to be outside, try to limit exposure as much as possible. The UV rays from this will also be insane, so definitely would recommend sunscreen. Also, another key factor in factoring in our heat index, or heat indices as they're actually called properly in plural, is the dew points here. And the dew points are absolutely ridiculous. 60, 70 degree dew points, only helping to kind of pile it on over here across the board. So those relative humidities and those dew points are going to factor in for some very dangerous and at times extreme heat indices. And we'll go ahead and take a look at those values right now. So we've changed it over. It looks almost exactly the same as what we were looking at with the temperature map, but this is factoring in the humidity along with our surface temperature. And as a result, we're going to see some crazy values over here. In fact, I'm not going to let this run in a loop. I'm actually going to kind of break this down bit by bit here. So this is us heading into the weekend. We're already seeing our triple digits kind of popping up here, but it's really as we get into the start of next week where we see probably some of the worst numbers that we'll see all year. Look at this. In South Carolina, towards the heart of the state, we're dealing with a heat index of 111, and that runs all up and down the Gulf Coast as we head into Monday. As we go into Tuesday and beyond, we're seeing the same thing starting to pop up over here across almost the entire mid-south here and deep south as well, all the way up the Mississippi River Basin, where triple-digit heat indices and maybe even 110s are almost likely at this point. So like I said, this heat is not going to be something to play with here. You definitely want to take proper precautions because heat can be dangerous and even fatal, I would go as far as to say. We've had heat waves before that have, unfortunately, people perished. And we need to make sure that we're doing our due diligence here to make sure that that doesn't happen in this case. If you don't have AC, I'll try to leave a link in the description to where you can get to a shelter, which would allow you to cool off a bit because we're going to need it this week. And the heat indices don't really fully back away, even though mercifully we aren't going to be dealing with those 110 temperatures at this point. So either way, once we get past this upcoming week here, the heat doesn't necessarily go away. I want to make it clear. It's better than what it will be, but nonetheless, you still want to be making sure that you're practicing those precautions. It's going to be the dog days of summer. It's August. We kind of know what we're in for at this point. But now we've talked about the heat, we still have to talk about our storm potential. And what I want to really highlight here at this point is that even though we're going to have that ridge, it's not like our storm potential is going to go away completely. Even though typically with those ridges and high pressure, we tend to have more stable, dry air. But over that next week, though, we're still going to have potential for storms, of course, over towards the northern plains here and the Midwest. And there's still going to be chances for those pop-up thunderstorms to occur over towards the deep south here. Another area which I really want to kind of point out here that has more potential for some development is over towards the southwest, especially over towards New Mexico and parts of maybe even Arizona. We're hoping that this doesn't end up being dry thunderstorms in this case, but there's plenty of energy still left over towards this area. And then also with the lightning flash density on here and troughing, I'm led to believe that we're going to have enough moisture in here to get at least a little bit of rain out of this. And that's really good for these areas during this time of year, because you need all you can get here, because as the pattern begins to shift, especially get towards fall, these areas unfortunately tend to dry out a bit. So it's nice to see potential for rain over here. Whoever ends up getting it, that's still to be determined at this point, but it seems like we're going to have at least a couple of good shots or opportunities at some rain here. As we're looking at the amount of energy that's available in the atmosphere as we go throughout the rest of the weather pattern, you can see that across the board, Midwest and the Ohio Valley are going to be the points of interest. We do see some potential even towards the Northeast, and as we go further along, we're going to start to see that potential even start to sink to the south once we get that trough coming into play. Now, as we get towards the 300-hour mark, you start to see that potential beginning to come in for the deep south here, especially over towards the southern half of the Ohio Valley, even reaching into the Tennessee Valley. So like I said, my hunch remains over here towards these regions in regards to our severe weather potential going down the line. Again, looking into the medium to long range here, not going to hold my hat on that and say that's exactly what will happen, but from the signals that I've seen so far, it seems like like I said, the potential's there. So lastly, we're going to go ahead and take the Euro or take the GFS cape off the screen here and take a look at what our precip map could look like here to end the model run across the board if this would start moving. Like I said, the rest of the weekend, we're still going to have opportunities for showers and storms across the deep south. Most focused activity is going to be over towards the Ohio Valley and the Northeast. By the time we end the weekend here, our attention will begin to shift over towards the northern plain states once more. We'll have isolated showers and thunderstorms still possible over towards these areas with the amount of moisture that we have available. And if we're on the right side of that trough of the ridge here, so to speak, there's still potential for low pressure centers to pop up here, but I wouldn't be too concerned about any potential for tropical development. Now, as we get into the month of August here, you can see that by this point, this will be the time frame in which our ridge begins to come in. Notable low pressure pops up over here towards the Ohio Valley, and this increases shower and storm activity across the eastern seaboard as a whole. And then from that point, storm potential definitely looks to ramp up from that point anywhere east of the Mississippi. I would still watch the northern plain states across the board for severe weather potential. And if we rewind that back one more time and take a look at the southwest here, it does look like it's notably busier than what I've seen in recent time over here. This actually seems like a little bit more organized chance of showers and thunderstorms that I've seen probably the last year or so. There's going to be pretty good opportunity, and the amount of rainfall that we get is still in question. I don't think we're going to see significant amounts, but if these storms were to start training over these areas, you never know what could happen. So definitely still want to be on your guard over here, but this is more or less going to be good news for you guys for the most part. But we'll see how this ultimately pans out. But to all of you that have stayed tuned, especially all the way to the end, I want to say thank you for watching, and I will see you with another video tomorrow, and I'll be back later this week. Till then, everybody take care and have a wonderful rest of your weekend.